Alright, so to make a bit of rope we need a bit of material, and what we've got here is flax. Now I know I said it's a hemp rope making factory, but what I'm using is flax because hemp, the other word for hemp is cannabis there. So if I used it I'd be in great big trouble with my boss.
What's the other word?
Flax.
Yeah.
And hemp, the other word for hemp is cannabis.
Oh, right.
Yes, yeah.
Is that why they stopped in the 70s?
Perhaps, yes. There are many other reasons they stopped it in the 70s, but we'll get to there in a moment. So what I've got here is a jack. Now this jack is incredibly old. It's about 150 odd years old now, coming into. And notice how I've got one handle and it's moving all of the hooks. Woohoo! Before this came in, you had 3 separate people on each hook, turning each one, okay, in unison. So it would have been a bit more difficult. Now it's called a rope walk for a reason. I'm going to be moving down over this way to the hook at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to go back and forth, and keep in mind that everything that you see here today, bar the fresh material, has actually been abandoned by the last rope makers. Alright, so we're very lucky enough to be able to use this today. And as you can see, I'm going back and forth until I get 6 strings, 2 on each hook. Now, I could keep going to infinity to make some really serious thick rope, but today, no, I'm just going to make a washing line instead, which were popularly ordered back in the day. So, it's made of plant material, just like hemp, so it's really, really strong when it's together. That's all the fibres working together. If I untwine it, like so, the fibres, generally, they stop working together. Okay, so when it was once strong before, bam, completely doesn't work together anymore. You can see the fibres at the end there. They come out, they're useless. But think about it, in the 1500s, when they're creating stuff in this factory, you get a paper cut in the 1500s and you die from infection. All right, there's more chance of it anyway. All right, so back in the day, if you're using a piece of string that you don't need any scissors or knives to cut with, that's brilliant. That's just a bonus, you know. So I'm just going to tie this off. Excellent. So you can see in the middle there, it's starting to bunch together. We don't want that. We want to keep every single piece of rope here, string here, separated out. So I'm going to use this thing here called the top, and the top is just going to run down and keep these bits separated out. And it's going to work with this thing here. Look, this is a looper, and the looper spins each side, and the looper is just going to sit at the end like this. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what it's going to do now. I'd rather you just see instead. But just for now, that's just there. Now, I will need a volunteer. Anyone feel like turning the cog? Oh, the cameraman can't do it. Yeah, absolutely. What's your name? Our rope maker. And as a rope maker, your life has significantly changed. You would start work at the age of 4 here at Peak Cavern. Start work at the age of 4, you'd have been born in this cave, and you'd be expected to die in this cave as well. It's a family lineage thing that goes throughout the ages. So once you're in this cave, once you're born here, you don't really get any education, but you know how to make a piece of rope. So imagine how hard it is to leave the cave to get another job outside when you don't know how to read or write, you just know how to make rope. So these rope makers were very closed off from society, as it were. Very hard life to live. With all of the health conditions that we see, the smoke and what we've already talked about, you'd be very lucky to see the age of 40 to 45 there. So thank you for being a volunteer. Yeah, indeed. So what I'd like you to do as my cogsman, is could you turn the cog anti-clockwise for me as fast as you wish? Go for it. Alright, and stop there for me, Nick. Just keep your hand on the handle for me, just keep it still there, thank you. So I've got this looper looped on as we've seen before. Because I've done this, I can easily take it off. and put it in this position here. Now in this position the looper is going to want to spin around, so it can spin around quite freely each end now, which is really important because when Nick continues in a moment it'll start creating our rope. Now because the top is here, it'll only make the rope on this side of the top, which is really good. That means it's going to be very nice and tight as a bit of rope. Now if the top wasn't here, it'd be making the rope from the middle and it'd be a lank piece of rope that nobody wants to buy. And you'll see what I mean now. So Nick, could you continue for me? Thank you. So I'm just going to wait until the looper starts to spin around, and I'm going to feel this immense amount of pressure pushing the top upwards. I'm going to keep on pushing the top backwards on itself to create a really tight bit of rope on this side. So I'm not pushing this up at all, I'm pushing it back. And yeah, excellent, stop there. One moment, we're not quite finished. Keep that there for me. I'm just going to put these onto one hook because we don't want them on 3 separate pieces anymore, because we've basically got our bit of rope, as you can see. But the very last thing we're going to be doing is we're going to add in a bit of counter tension to make the rope stronger. Right, so this time, what I want you to do is turn the cog the other way clockwise, and as you do, I'm going to be pulling on the rope, so go for it. Alright, this is introducing some counter tension, but it's also making the rope a lot smoother as well. Yes, it hurts a little bit on my hands, but I've done it long enough that they're a bit rough now. Wonderful, thank you very much. Excellent, you can leave it there. A round of applause for our volunteer. Thank you very much. Thank you. Would you like to touch the rope, guys? All right, so here's a good example of a miner's rope. So what we've done here is made a washing line. This is a miner's rope. So we've used 6 strings today. The miner's rope was 60 strings at least. So you could do more than that if you wish. Give it a handle there. At the very bottom of, well, the top of that rope, there's a loop called the Marison loop. Now the Marison loop was invented in this cave at the front, and I'll demonstrate that for you now on this one here, because they all had the Marison loops as a way to stop the end coming undone. Now the rope should be strong enough from that counter tension we put in just to stand up quite nicely. Oh, it keeps going on its own there, look. If it go any further. Look at that. Okay. So they're quite sturdy ropes, but they do need this Marison loop. And as you can imagine, the Marison loop was invented by a guy called Mr. Marison. He was the master rope maker, and he would have invented this by finding a weak point towards the end of the rope, as I've just found there. Now I can fit the edge of my thumb through there, just like that, but no more. So I just need to open up this hole, like so. Okay, so I've got a bit of a bigger hole now. I can put the end of the rope through this hole, okay, and it should create quite a small shape of a snail. Little baby snail there, look. That could be very small there. Very tight rope there. So I'm just going to untwine the snail's head. And as I do, I'm just going to say that this particular job here was done by the children of the Cavern. So the children of the Cavern, as I said, they started work at the age of 4, and they'd have been doing this job that I'm doing now, the Marison loop, for, well, could be up to 10 hours a day there. All right, so very serious job. And the reason only the children did this job is because they could. All right, so imagine doing this for 10 hours a day, not leaving this cave. You're not getting enough sunlight. In fact, the only reason they left the cave was to go to church on a Sunday. Right, so we are Christians there. So you're not, again, so I've just unlooped the head, and I'm just going to twine it back on its body, looping it round, and then I'll pull it through, and it creates like an everlasting loop. So these children were doing that for many times a day, and they're fiddling around with their fingers. When they reach the age of 15, approximately 15 or so, their fingers would kind of freeze shut a bit there. So the adults couldn't manoeuvre their fingers very well to do the small Marison loops. In that sense, all of the adults could only do the cogsman work and the heavy lifting on all of those kind of jobs, but not any of the smaller, finer bits. It's also good to mention that the children would have actually made the string as well. So they were actually placing all the bits of string together. Now, I know it's just a washing line, but still it's going to be quite strong, and it'll stretch out a bit. So it's just stretched out a bit there on my body weight. I can feel it kind of extend a few centimetres there. I wouldn't suggest taking it home and using it on your body weight and just, you know, going up walls and things, but it's still sturdy as a washing line. The irony being, this is flax, so it's going to rot if it gets wet. So it's not a very good washing line. In fact, they're all going to rot after perhaps a week or so if you get these wet, because they're made out of plants. All right, so that's not very good. But they had a plan. They were going to, as we discussed a little bit earlier, they were going to try to get them with a little bit more longevity by coating them in animal fats. Now, they kept their animals down at the very bottom of this cave, just down there, and we'll go there in a second so you can have a gander, in something we call the swine hole. And they kept the animals in the swine hole. They took the animal fat, boiled it down. They boiled the animal fats down to create tallow by adding in a little bit of ash. And this tallow would not only be a waterproofing for the ropes, they would also make candles out of this tallow as well. And this is actually where you get a very famous phrase. The miners coming up after a month, finding that their ropes were a bit off, because the tallow had worn away by that time. So they came back to complain quite often, saying, "Why is my rope not in good condition anymore? I want a new one." And they'd say, "Oh, sorry, sir, we'll take that away and we'll give you a new one, half the price, how about that?" They take it away, secretly redip the same rope in just fresh tallow, give it back, say, "Half the price, sir." All right, this is where we get that phrase, money for old rope, from. Yeah, so very cool. And as I said, you know, we can't, or I'm not going to be dipping this in tallow anytime soon. Well, I'm vegan, so it wouldn't work out too well. But you can still see all the tallow here today, across the walls and the ceilings. You can see this wonderful black animal fat that's scattered across the walls and the ceiling there. Any questions before we move on?
Just wondering, with all the people that are living in here,
Yeah.
was that the town there at the same time, and people were living there?
Yes.
Did they mix at all?
They wouldn't mix, no. So these two groups are very segregated from each other. You have the weird rope makers, you know, living in the cave, working in the cave that the townspeople know of. The townspeople very separate from the rope makers there. Yeah, very intensely weird.
What were the people in the town doing?
Most of the townsfolk were miners at that time. In fact, if you go into the graveyard at all, if you go into the graveyard, you see the word Marison quite a lot. Now the Marison, as we talked about, that was the guy that made the loop at the very end in the 1500s. But if you go through his family history, that's a family lineage throughout the rope makers. You'll find that the Marisons went all the way up until the very last Marison, who was the last and final rope maker. His name was Bertie Marison, and he's actually still here today with us. Just over there, there's a little candle, and just behind that candle, his ashes are scattered in the walls there. So he would have passed away in the 1970s, whilst the first Marison, Abraham Marison, was here in the 1500s. So that lineage really does carry on. Quite intense. And there are videos of Bertie Marison online. Because, you know, the television's been invented, cameras have been invented by that point. So. All right, so before we move on, I want to thank my cameraman very much. Thank you, Chris. Excellent, bad, thank you. And before we move on, this is for you. Thank you very much. Don't get it wet, it will rot. All right.